Across the frostbitten pine woods of Silver Bend, Oregon, snow draped the earth like a quiet prayer, gentle, white, and cold. But beneath the branches of a lone pine, tied cruelly to an old trail marker, a German shepherd lay still. His breathing was shallow. His eyes, however, were not lifeless. They were waiting for a voice he thought he'd never hear again, waiting for the man who'd loved him enough to let him go. Before we begin, have you ever loved someone so much that letting them go felt like the only way to protect them? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if you believe that no dog should ever be abandoned, especially not one who once served to protect us, then hit that subscribe button. Because this one is about redemption, the ghosts we carry, and the dogs who never stop watching the door we closed behind them. Snowfall in Silver Bend, Oregon wasn't rare, but that morning it came with a kind of silence that pressed into the bones. The dense fir forest surrounding the small town had turned into a cathedral of white, branches sagging with frost, trails buried beneath layers of fresh powder. The kind of morning where everything looked peaceful, until you stepped too close and saw what was hidden underneath. Officer Lucas Reed moved slowly through the snow, his breath curling like smoke against the air. He was tall, lean, with sun-worn skin and eyes the color of moss after rain. Quiet eyes, heavy with memories. At 28, Lucas had already seen more death than he cared to remember. The scar across his left hand, barely visible now, reminded him of the night his older brother Matthew bled out beside him during a failed drug raid in Portland. Since transferring to the small-town force 2 years ago, Lucas had traded city sirens for pine trees and back roads, but some ghosts followed no matter the zip code. He had volunteered for forest patrol that morning, not for any pressing reason, just the silence. Something in him always pulled toward solitude. Maybe because quiet places don't ask questions. But even the forest speaks when it wants to. A low, broken whine cut through the stillness. Lucas froze. He tilted his head, breath held. Again, a soft sound like something caught between life and surrender. He followed it past a cluster of frozen bushes, up a slight rise. That's when he saw the pine. Locals called it Widow's Tree. It stood alone where the path curved, gnarled by time, its bark twisted like sorrow. And beneath it, a dog. Tied to a rotting trail post, half buried in snow, the German shepherd lay motionless but not dead. His sable coat, once thick and regal, was now thin and crusted with ice. The rope around his neck had cut a raw ring into his flesh. His ribs jutted beneath skin. Yet the eyes, those eyes, watched Lucas with a flicker of something more than survival. Trust, maybe, or the last fragile thread of it. "Jesus," Lucas muttered, kneeling fast. "Hey there, buddy. I got you." The shepherd didn't flinch. Lucas drew his knife and sliced through the rope, catching the dog as he slumped forward. He wrapped his jacket around the cold body, whispering soft, steady reassurances. Years of trauma response training took over. Check breathing, check pulse, check eyes. Still alive. Barely. Lucas carried him through snow so deep it clung to his calves. At the cruiser, he cranked the heat and laid the dog on the passenger seat, watching the rise and fall of his chest. When the shepherd blinked once, Lucas smiled. "You're a fighter. I think I'll call you Shadow." Miles away, tucked beyond the edge of town, a cabin sat alone at the base of Black Ridge. Inside, James Holloway stared at a blank sheet of paper. A charcoal pencil trembled in his scarred fingers. He was 63, once barrel-chested and fierce-eyed, now worn thin like old leather. His gray beard was wild, his hands calloused from chopping firewood and memories. James had once been Silver Bend's most decorated detective, known for his tenacity, his instinct, and his refusal to back down. But none of those traits had saved his wife, Lorraine, or his daughter, Evie. It was 6 years ago now. Lorraine had been making breakfast. Evie was upstairs reading a story about mountain dogs and rescue missions. James had returned home early from a stakeout on a cartel lieutenant. He never heard the back door open, never saw the tripwire. The explosion blew the kitchen apart and ignited the gas line. Lorraine was gone instantly. Evie lived for 2 hours, long enough to whisper one thing in his arms. "Where's Shadow?" That moment haunted him more than the fire, more than the funerals, more than the fact that the man responsible, Victor Alonso, had never been caught. The department had offered him early retirement, therapy, medals. He took none of it. What he took was Shadow. Shadow had survived the blast by pure luck. James had raised him as a K-9 partner, trained him to detect bombs, track fugitives, read human intent. After the fire, the dog never left his side until last week. James hadn't eaten in days. He couldn't stand, couldn't breathe without feeling like someone was clawing at his chest. The night before he let Shadow go, he sat by the fireplace with the leash in his hand for 3 hours. Then he drove to Widow's Tree, tied the dog gently, whispered a prayer, and walked away. He told himself it was mercy, that letting go was better than letting him watch. Now, the leash hung empty on a nail by the door. James stared at it every hour. He hadn't picked up the pencil in days. Until today. Until the nightmares turned into something else. He drew Shadow's face, those eyes, again. And for the first time since that awful day, a tear slipped past the wall. Back in the cruiser, Lucas glanced at Shadow as they neared the station. Snow whipped sideways across the windshield, a squall rising fast. The shepherd's breathing was steadier now, but Lucas knew time was short. He radioed ahead to the local vet clinic. He didn't know who the dog belonged to. Didn't know that Shadow had once sniffed out explosives under Humvees in Kandahar, or saved children from a hostage standoff in Portland. He didn't know that Shadow's heart had once kept pace with a man who'd lost everything. He just knew that dog had not given up. And Lucas? Neither would he. Not on his watch. The veterinary clinic in Silverbend was a modest structure tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a bait shop, the kind of place that smelled faintly of pine disinfectant and linoleum that never quite dried. Lucas Reed carried Shadow through the front door just as the snowstorm began to gather force outside. The wind howled against the glass like a warning. Dr. Eliza Monroe looked up from her clipboard and nearly dropped it. She was in her early 40s, African-American, with sharp cheekbones and a no-nonsense gait that made most officers sit up straighter when she entered a room. Years in Army Field Veterinary Service had honed both her medical skill and her tolerance for panic. She wasn't easily rattled, but the state of the dog Lucas brought in made her blink twice. "What the hell happened to him?" she asked, stepping forward. "Found him tied to a post in the woods. Cold, malnourished, but hanging on," Lucas said, his voice edged with urgency. "Name's Shadow, at least for now. I think he used to be a working dog." Eliza narrowed her eyes as she examined the German shepherd. The dog was around 6 or 7 years old, maybe older. His black and tan coat, though rough and dirty, still held the glint of its prime. There was a graying streak near his muzzle, a sign of stress or age or both. His tail thumped weakly at the sound of Lucas's voice. Lucas helped lay the dog on the exam table, and Eliza ran her fingers gently along his neck and ears. That's when she found it. A faded tattoo inside Shadow's left ear. PX01476K9, she read aloud. Lucas leaned in. "That's not a shelter ID, that's a law enforcement prefix." Eliza's expression shifted. PD dogs from the Portland Division used to carry codes like that. It's old, before microchips became the standard. She stepped away and pulled out her tablet. "I'll search the archived law enforcement K9 database. Might take a while." Lucas nodded but was already moving toward the back office. "Mind if I make a call while you work?" "Go," she said, already typing. In the small office, lit by a flickering fluorescent tube, Lucas logged into the secure police database. The faded tattoo kept flashing in his mind. PX014766K9. He input the number into the retired Canine Service records. The results loaded slowly, then hit him like a punch to the chest. Name: Shadow. Assigned unit: Portland PD Special Task Force. Handler: Detective James Holloway. Status: retired. Date of retirement: August 3rd, 3 years ago. Notes: Handler declined reassignment. Dog released to private ownership under psychological hardship clause. Lucas sat back in his chair. He'd read the name before. Holloway wasn't just a name on a file. He was a story in the academy. A legend, really. A detective who lost everything in an explosion meant for him. The official story was that he vanished from public life after retirement, but no one said anything about a dog. He printed the file and folded it into his jacket. Outside the office, Eliza was prepping fluids and warming blankets. She looked up when he returned. "I can stabilize him, but he'll need rest, and food, lots of it, and time." Lucas gave her a grateful nod. "I'll cover everything. Just keep him safe." Back on the edge of Black Ridge, James Holloway stood motionless in front of the fireplace. A fire crackled, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. In his hand, he held a photograph. Creased, soft-edged, taken years ago. Lorraine was smiling, her eyes bright. Evie stood beside her in a school uniform holding a small puppy with oversized ears and a ridiculous, hopeful grin. Shadow. James's hands trembled. His chest ached, not from age or illness, but from something older. Guilt. The whispers had returned last night. The voice. That voice. "Stay down, Holloway." The same barked command from the raid in East Portland, the one he shouted to his partner before the door blew inward. Now it came in the dark, echoing from corners of the cabin, slithering between dream and memory. He rubbed his temples. The bottle of prescription meds sat untouched on the shelf. There was a knock at the door. James stiffened. Another knock, gentler this time. He opened it slowly, revealing a woman in her mid-30s, bundled in a red knit coat with snow in her dark brown curls. She carried a canvas bag and wore a badge around her neck. Maya Brooks, Community Outreach for the Silver Bend Retired Officers Fund. She had soft brown eyes, quick hands, and a warmth that disarmed even the most hardened men. Her presence here was routine, though James never encouraged it. "Maya," he muttered, already turning away. "Hi, James," she said, stepping inside with practiced grace. "I brought soup, carrot ginger, and meds from the fund pharmacy. They said you skipped refill week." He grunted. "I didn't ask for anything." "I know, but I brought it anyway." Her smile was soft, but there was steel beneath it. Maya had grown up around addiction. Her father, a former patrol officer, had never recovered after a shooting. She recognized self-destruction in others like breath on glass. She unpacked the bag, laying out food, pill bottles, and clean socks. James watched, arms folded, saying nothing. "I also brought sketch paper," she said casually. "Your last letter to the fund mentioned you'd run out." James's gaze flicked toward the fireplace mantel where several drawings sat propped against the stone. Shadows and silhouettes of a German shepherd with eyes that always looked back. Maya hesitated. "Where's Shadow?" James flinched. "I haven't seen him out lately," she continued gently. "He used to bark every time I pulled into the drive." James said nothing. His throat felt tight. "I hope—" "Nothing happened," Maya added, voice low. James looked away. "He's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I let him go," he whispered. "Didn't want him watching me die." Maya stood in stunned silence, her heart dropping. She didn't press, didn't cry. Instead, she began packing up slowly. "If he comes back, James, let me know. He's not just your dog. He's your lifeline." When she left, James sank to the floor, resting his head against the chair where Shadow used to sleep. For the first time in days, he let the tears fall. Back at the station, Lucas sat beside Shadow's kennel as the dog slept under a heating pad. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a soft glow on the shepherd's face. Despite the trauma, the dog's posture had relaxed, ears less rigid, breath steadier. Lucas held a file in his lap. James Holloway. He stared at the name and wondered what kind of pain drove a man to give up the last living thing he had. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 24 hours he would drive up to a cabin on Black Ridge, files in hand, questions on his lips, and a wounded dog at his side. And that moment would change everything. The morning sun broke through the clouds in slanted streaks of gold and gray, lighting the town of Silver Bend with a pale glow that made the frost sparkle on rooftops like powdered diamonds. But the warmth was only visual. The air was sharp, the kind that turned breath into smoke and thoughts into ghosts. Lucas Reed sat in the corner of the station's small break room, one leg bouncing under the table. On the linoleum counter behind him, a pot of coffee brewed lazily, but he hadn't touched it. He was too focused on the worn leather collar sitting in front of him. After bringing Shadow back to the station overnight, he had taken the time to carefully clean the dog's neck wounds and dry his thick fur. As he had unbuckled the collar, something crinkled under his fingers. At first, he'd thought it was just an old tag, but tucked into the seam of the inner leather behind the metal ID ring was a folded piece of paper, creased, slightly damp, stained at the edges. Lucas unfolded it slowly, hands steady, eyes narrowing as he read. To whoever finds him. His name is Shadow. He's a war dog, a police dog, and my last piece of reason. I couldn't let him watch me die. Not again. He's seen enough. If you're reading this, I'm already gone, or close to it. Please, don't treat him like a pet. Treat him like a soldier, like a brother. James Holloway. The writing was jagged, rushed but deliberate, each letter pressed too deeply into the page. Lucas let the paper fall onto the table beside the collar, his heart thudding with a quiet, aching realization. James hadn't abandoned Shadow. He had tried to protect him, not from the cold, from grief. He looked toward the kennel, where Shadow now lay curled on a thick blanket, head resting on crossed paws. The shepherd's breathing had steadied, but his eyes still followed Lucas's every move, as if calculating what would come next. Lucas ran a hand down his face. The image of the dog tied in the snow under Widow's Tree wouldn't leave him, nor would the words on the page. He stood, slid the letter back into the collar, and made a silent vow. Shadow wouldn't have to watch another person disappear. Not again. Back on Black Ridge, James Holloway sat at his kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of untouched tea. His eyes were red-rimmed, and the charcoal under his nails was darker than usual. The previous night had been long, longer than most. Dreams blurred with memories, and the whisper of "stay down" had returned in full force. A breeze slipped in from the cracked window, fluttering the edge of a notebook left open on the table. It was a thick, spiral-bound journal, pages filled with writing and rough sketches, an unfinished memoir James had once promised himself he'd complete. Maya Brooks returned just after 10, her curls tied back today in a loose bun beneath a knitted beanie, cheeks flushed from the wind. She didn't knock this time. After nearly a year of visits, she knew the sound startled him. "Morning, James," she said softly, setting down a fresh loaf of bread and a thermos of lentil soup. James grunted in return, not looking up. Maya, 35, had a gentle presence that concealed a resilient spirit. Her late father had taught her to shoot a .22 when she was 12, and how to drive stick by the time she turned 15. She had the kind of voice that made people tell her things they didn't mean to, and she had grown fond of James Holloway, though she'd never say so aloud. She noticed the open journal and paused. "You've been writing again." James said nothing. Maya sat across from him. "May I read a page?" "No," he replied almost too quickly. She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because it's not finished." "I don't care if it's finished." James sighed and slid the book toward her. She turned to a marked page near the middle. The handwriting was rough but legible, and the sketch beside it was of a man and a dog, both in silhouette standing in front of a burning house. "Shadow came to me in the wreckage. I don't mean the debris, I mean the silence after they died. He was a pup then, too small for service, too loyal to be left behind. I trained him to smell death, but he was the one who kept me breathing." Maya blinked, gently closed the notebook, and placed her hand over his. "You should finish this," she said, "even if no one ever reads it." He looked away. She hesitated, then asked, "James, did you leave him out there because you thought he couldn't handle your pain? Or because you thought you didn't deserve his love?" The question hit like a slow punch to the gut. He didn't answer. That afternoon, Lucas made a quiet stop by the town's archival record center, a place that looked more like a forgotten library than any modern office. Inside, a volunteer archivist named Wendell, late 60s, flannel shirt, bifocals too low on his nose, helped Lucas pull up James Holloway's background. They found clippings, citations, photos, and buried between a pension request and a disciplinary review, a final report filed 3 years ago. Canine Officer, Shadow, transferred to Handler for post-service therapy. Reason, survivor's guilt, companion therapy recommendation. Lucas closed the file slowly. He was trying to keep the dog alive, after everything else died. Wendell raised an eyebrow. Sounds like the dog was doing the same. That evening, back in the station, Lucas stood outside the kennel and crouched down. Shadow lifted his head. Lucas unhooked the collar, refastened it gently around the dog's neck, letter still hidden inside, and whispered, "I found your note, buddy, and I promise you're not alone anymore." The shepherd blinked, then laid his head down again, tail thumping softly against the blanket. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the loudest echoes. The moon hung low over Silver Bend like a pale coin caught between branches, its soft light casting a hush over the snow-covered rooftops. It was just past midnight when Lucas Reed sat alone in his living room, fingers tracing the edge of the old collar now resting on the coffee table beside him. He had read the letter 3 more times, as if hoping a different truth might be waiting between the ink strokes. But the words never changed. What changed was the weight they carried. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the couch, head resting on his paws, one ear twitching now and then. His breathing had grown deeper, more even in recent hours. The heating lamp borrowed from the vet's office stood nearby, humming softly. The shepherd had not yet regained his strength, but Lucas saw the shift, especially since Ellie had started visiting. Ellie Ramsey, age 9, lived in the house 2 doors down with her aunt. She was a wisp of a child. Freckles dusted across her cheeks like cinnamon, a wild mop of auburn curls tied back in a perpetually crooked ponytail. Her clothes were always a little mismatched, often with drawings of dogs or dinosaurs on them, and her speech was fast, curious, and utterly sincere. She had met Shadow just once, and that was enough. The next day, she returned with a fleece blanket, a box of dog treats shaped like bones, and a hand-drawn name tag that read, "Shadow, Hero Dog." Lucas hadn't planned on letting her stay long, but Shadow, who had barely lifted his head for anyone, thumped his tail the moment Ellie sat down on the floor. She didn't try to pet him immediately. Instead, she talked, told him about school, her favorite cartoons, her dream of becoming a vet/astronaut. She didn't expect him to answer, which, Lucas realized, was probably why he listened. Now, hours later, Shadow slept soundly in the corner, and Lucas stared at the file he had placed beside the collar. James Holloway's number was scribbled on the top of the sheet. Lucas had gone back and forth for 2 days, unsure whether calling was the right move, but tonight, with the room quiet and Shadow alive because someone had loved him enough to let go, Lucas understood something vital. That man deserved to know his dog had survived. He picked up the phone and dialed. The line rang twice before a groggy, gravel-edged voice answered, "Holloway." "Detective Holloway." Lucas cleared his throat. "My name's Officer Lucas Reed, Silverbend PD. Don't call me that." The voice was sharp, defensive. Lucas nodded slowly, then softened his tone. "Mr. Holloway, I found something in the forest 2 nights ago, tied under a pine near the old Ridge Trail." Silence. "It was a dog," Lucas continued. "A German Shepherd, sable coat, left ear scarred, responds to the name Shadow." The breath on the other end caught. The pause that followed was more than hesitation. It was pain breaking through layers of armor. "Is he?" James began, then stopped. "Alive?" "Yes, weak, but recovering." The line stayed quiet for a long time until Lucas said, "If you'd like to see him, he's at my place for now. The clinic stabilized him, but I didn't want to leave him alone. He's been waiting." Lucas expected resistance. Instead, there was a choked noise, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I never meant for him to suffer," James said, barely audible. I thought he'd be free. Better off." "I think," Lucas said gently, "he's just been waiting for you." It took James 20 minutes to arrive. Lucas opened the door to find a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. James wore a thick brown coat, unzipped despite the chill, his gray beard disheveled, hands shoved deep into his pockets. His eyes scanned past Lucas before he could speak, searching the room until they landed on the form by the couch. Shadow stirred. He lifted his head slowly. Eyes locked on James. Then, with surprising strength, he pushed to his feet and gave a single, low bark, sharp, insistent, like a call from years ago. James stepped forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. "Hey there," he whispered. Shadow barked again, staggered forward 2 steps, then collapsed back down, tail thumping hard against the floor. James sank to his knees beside him. His hands reached out, hesitated, then rested on the dog's fur. His voice cracked like dry wood. "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so damn sorry." He leaned in until his forehead touched Shadow's, tears falling freely now, soaking into the shepherd's neck. Lucas turned away, giving them the dignity of silence. Shadow didn't move. He just let the weight settle, like he understood everything. The next morning, Ellie returned dragging a wagon full of dog toys and a homemade welcome back banner that was, objectively, more glitter than paper. She skidded to a stop when she saw James sitting on the porch steps, Shadow at his feet. "Who's that?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "That's James," Lucas said, stepping outside with 2 mugs of coffee. "Shadow's person." Ellie studied him. "He looks sad." "He's working on it." She marched forward, offering James one of the toys from her wagon. "You can give him this. He likes the squeaky ones." James took the toy, a lime green duck with googly eyes, and nodded solemnly. "Thank you." Ellie sat beside Shadow, patting his head. "I'm Ellie. I live over there. I visit every day. I think he missed you." James blinked a few times, then managed a smile. "I think I missed him more." That night, Shadow ate a full bowl of food for the first time since he'd arrived. Lucas noticed. So did James. And though neither of them said it aloud, both were thinking the same thing. Maybe this wasn't just the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. The late winter sun gleamed faintly over Portland, casting long shadows across the pavement as Lucas guided his cruiser toward the old training compound. Shadow sat upright in the back seat, ears perked, eyes sharp, his coat gleaming from days of care. James Holloway sat beside him in the passenger seat, fingers laced tightly, gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. He hadn't said much during the drive, only that it had been nearly 3 years since he last stepped foot inside the K-9 training yard, and even longer since he had spoken to anyone there. The compound, surrounded by a tall rusted fence and rows of pine trees, looked older than Lucas expected. The paint on the front sign had faded, and the gravel lot crunched beneath the tires as they pulled in. But despite the wear, the place still breathed, like a resting beast, quiet but not forgotten. As the car stopped, Shadow's tail began to thump against the seat. Lucas smiled. He remembers. James opened the door slowly. Of course he does. They stepped out into the cold air. James wore a thick charcoal coat over a gray flannel dark jeans and worn boots. His face, though more rested than before, still carried the quiet fatigue of years lost in silence. But something in the way he stood now, shoulders slightly straighter, breath less heavy, suggested the weight might finally be shifting. From the front office, a tall woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a precise bun came out to meet them. Captain Dana Fletcher, early 50s, stood with practiced posture and eyes that missed nothing. She had once been James's supervisor and close friend, known for running one of the toughest K-9 units in Oregon. She wore her badge like a part of her spine, unbending, constant. "James," she said, her voice softer than expected. "I didn't believe Lucas when he called, not until he sent the picture." James gave a tired smile. Still not great at smiling for the camera. Fletcher chuckled, then turned her gaze to Shadow. "And look at this old soldier. Still carrying that sharp look like he owns the place." At the sound of her voice, Shadow trotted forward and sat at her feet, lifting a paw, a gesture he hadn't used in years. Fletcher bent down, gently grasped it, and whispered, "Good boy." Inside the training yard, officers began to gather. Word had spread fast. Shadow was alive. Even more stunning, James was with him. One by one, handlers and officers, some new, some who had served beside James, came to say hello. There was Officer Ron McCaffrey, a stout man with a beard like a lion's mane, who had trained with James in the early 2000s. Sergeant Marla Gage, lean and serious, greeted James with a nod and clasped his hand without words. Lucas stood off to the side, watching as Shadow moved through the group with calm confidence, tail swaying, accepting pats and familiar scents. It was like watching a ghost slowly become flesh again. Both man and dog returned to the place that had once defined them. Captain Fletcher called the group to attention. "We owe this dog and his partner a lot more than medals or ceremony. We owe them our respect, and if either of them ever want to talk, teach, or simply sit on the porch out back, we'll make room." James looked at the group, then shook his head gently. "I'm not ready to talk," he said. "But thank you." No one pushed. They understood. Meanwhile, back in Silverbend, Maya Brooks sat at her desk in the modest medical clinic tucked behind the fire station. She was reading a patient transfer record when her eyes paused on a line. Holloway, James, Emergency Field Trauma, June 21st, 3 years ago. Her fingers hovered, the breath caught in her chest. The report was one she'd seen before, one she'd helped write. She hadn't told Lucas or anyone about that night. Back then, Maya had been working as an EMT in Portland, covering night shifts while finishing her trauma psychology degree. That summer night, she'd been the one who knelt beside a scorched, unconscious German shepherd outside a smoking house. The raid had gone wrong. Explosives were planted. The dog had dragged himself out of the fire and collapsed beside a girl's body. Maya had kept her hand on the shepherd's chest the entire way to the trauma center. Shadow's pulse had barely held. His handler had been taken separately in another ambulance, screaming into nothing. Maya never forgot the look in his eyes. She reached under her desk and pulled out a folder marked Hold, a personal file she'd compiled over the years. In it were articles, a photo from the scene, and a small drawing. Shadow and the little girl with ribbons in her hair. She had sketched it on the back of an incident report. For some reason, she couldn't throw it away. That's why she'd requested the Silverbend assignment after graduation. Why she checked in on James Holloway even when he didn't want her to. Why she never stopped wondering if the shepherd had survived. Now she knew. That evening, as the sun lowered over the Portland skyline, Lucas, James, and Shadow sat quietly on a bench just outside the compound. Behind them, the building buzzed with life, laughter, and echoes of commands called out across the training yard. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and placed it beside Lucas. A silver badge, worn, slightly bent, but unmistakable. It was hers, James said. Evie's. She used to pin it to her backpack when she came to watch training sessions. Said it made her feel brave. Lucas picked it up reverently. She'd be proud of you. James didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. Maybe, he said at last. Or maybe she'd just be glad her dog came home. The first drizzle of March had begun to stain the sidewalks of Silverbend, coating the old cedar fences and rain-beaten windows with a silver sheen. Lucas Reed stood in the small evidence room at the station, the musty scent of old paper, rusted metal, and faint mildew wrapping around him like a cloak. The room was dim, save for a single desk lamp casting a pale glow over a stack of forgotten files. One of them, yellowed and taped at the corners, bore a faint label. Holloway, 322. Incident, Preliminary Forensics. He hadn't meant to stumble upon it. He had been looking into a completely unrelated case, but when the name Holloway flickered across the corner of a file bin, something tugged at his gut. He opened it with the quiet reverence one reserves for a gravestone. Inside were brittle sheets, faded photographs, and a forensics report never finalized, never delivered. Lucas sat down, his eyes moving over each word carefully. The report detailed the house fire that had taken the lives of James's wife and daughter. But what caught his attention wasn't what was there. It was what was missing. A fingerprint analysis had been ordered on a metallic object found near the scene, a lighter engraved with the initials VR, but the results had never been attached. Worse, the file indicated no arrest had ever been made on a primary suspect. Lucas whispered to himself. They buried this. Later that afternoon, Lucas drove to the small counseling clinic where Maya Brooks worked part-time. He found her in the back room, sorting medication logs, her hair tied up in a tight braid today. She wore an olive sweater over navy scrubs, glasses resting low on her nose. She looked up, surprised. "I need your help," he said without preamble. She blinked. "With what?" He handed her the report. Something was left unfinished. James's case, it wasn't closed, and I think it's time someone did something about that. She scanned the pages, her fingers tightening around the edge. This lighter, it wasn't in any police testimony. "No," Lucas said, "but maybe it's still out there." That evening, they visited James at his cabin. He was outside, chopping kindling under a soft drizzle, Shadow sitting beside a dry patch under the eaves. The shepherd's ears perked up as they approached, and he gave a single bark of recognition. James glanced up, his expression wary. "I thought we buried that," he said flatly when Lucas presented the forensics file. Lucas's voice remained steady. "But the man who killed them may still be out there." James's face, hardened from grief and time, twitched with something unfamiliar, hope mixed with rage. Maya stepped closer. "We're not doing this for revenge. We're doing it for truth." After a long silence, James exhaled and nodded once. "I know the forest better than anyone," he said. "Let's start where it ended." They began their search the next morning. The forest behind the old Holloway property still carried the scent of pine and rain. Dead leaves crunched underfoot as they moved past what remained of the fire-damaged foundation. Lucas brought Shadow off-leash, letting the shepherd range ahead, nose low, ears alert. Shadow had aged, yes, but his instincts were honed like a blade. Suddenly, Shadow stopped near a mossy ridge. He sniffed the ground, whined low, and began pawing at the earth near a root cluster. Lucas knelt, brushing away debris until his fingers hit something cold. A lighter. Scorched. Still engraved. VR. Lucas stared at it as the wind shifted through the trees. "This survived," Maya whispered, "and they never logged it." James said nothing. His eyes were locked on the object, but his mind was 1,000 miles away. In the flames, in the smoke, holding the empty weight of his daughter's backpack. That night, back at Lucas's house, the three of them sat around the table. Shadow lay nearby, his head resting on Maya's foot. "We cross-checked the initials," Lucas said. "VR, that's our start." James took a sip of tea. "There was a man, Victor Rains. He was a runner for one of the gangs I testified against. Arsonist. Never convicted." Lucas leaned back. "If he's still in Oregon, we'll find him." Meanwhile, Ellie had her own story to tell. That weekend, she was sitting on the porch swing outside Lucas's house, feet barely touching the floor, when he joined her. She wore a raincoat printed with cartoon owls and held a melting popsicle in one hand. "Can I ask you something, Officer Lucas?" she said through a mouthful of grape ice. "Sure, kiddo." "Last week," she said slowly, "I saw a man outside Mr. James's cabin. He was tall, wore a dark jacket. He looked weird, like he didn't belong." Lucas straightened. "Did you tell anyone?" She nodded. "I told Aunt Janine, but she said maybe it was a delivery guy. But he didn't have a box or a truck." "Did you see where he went?" "Into the woods, same way Shadow comes from when he's exploring." Lucas's stomach dropped. He thanked her, gently removed the popsicle stick from her hand, and stood. Something was wrong. If Victor Rains, or whoever it was, had returned, they weren't just chasing shadows anymore. They were being watched. The night fell over Silver Bend in eerie silence, the kind that settles just before something ancient stirs. A brittle wind swept through the trees, rattling branches like old bones. James Holloway's cabin stood solemn among the pines, its windows dim, chimney long gone cold. Inside, James lay curled on the worn leather couch, an old blanket covering his legs, a sketch pad fallen to the floor beside him. Half-finished charcoal outlines of Shadow's eyes gazing back at him from the paper. Shadow lay nearby, head resting between his paws, chest rising slowly. His ears, though drooping in rest, twitched every so often at creaks and forest whispers. It was past midnight when the smell changed, just slightly. Faintly sweet, chemical, wrong. Shadow's nose twitched. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring. Smoke. And then, flames. It happened fast. Shadow sprang up, barking sharply. James jolted awake, eyes wild. "What is it, boy?" But then he saw it too. Orange glow licking the windows, smoke beginning to seep through the cracks beneath the door. For a moment, fear paralyzed him, PTSD crashing in like a wave. But Shadow barked again, louder, more urgent, pulling at the sleeve of James's coat. James stumbled to his feet, coughing, heat pressing in from every side. The back door was already consumed in flame. Shadow led him to the front. Too late, a support beam had fallen across it, blocking escape. The only way was through the side bedroom window. As James grabbed his coat and reached for the handle, a tiny voice called out from the smoke. "Help!" James froze. It was Ellie. 9-year-old Ellie Caldwell had sneaked over after her aunt had gone to sleep, hoping to surprise James with a new drawing for Shadow, an oddly shaped superhero dog hybrid she'd been working on all day. She had crept inside quietly, planning to leave it on the table and tiptoe back out. She hadn't expected the fire. Now she was trapped in the guest room, thick smoke filling her lungs, tears blurring her eyes. She coughed violently, trying to yell, but her voice barely squeaked out. James heard her again, this time more faintly, and instinct overrode everything else. He pulled the heavy dresser from against the door, bolted toward the room, and kicked it open. Smoke roared past him. Ellie lay curled beneath the bed, coughing, eyes wide with fear. "I've got you," James whispered, lifting her into his arms, wrapping his coat around her. "We're getting out of here." They made it to the side window where Shadow was already pawing the frame. James shattered the glass with a chair leg, cleared the shards with his sleeve, and hoisted Ellie through. Shadow jumped next, landing hard but safely. James followed last, landing awkwardly and falling to one knee, the weight of Ellie still in his arms. And then they heard it. Sirens. Lucas had been driving back from a night shift when dispatch crackled in. Fire reported at 14 West Ridge. Possible occupants inside. Lucas's blood ran cold. That was James's cabin. He floored the accelerator. When he arrived, the fire had already devoured the roof. Smoke coiled into the sky like the ghost of some ancient thing trying to escape. He saw them. 3 silhouettes at the tree line. James clutching Ellie. Shadow standing rigid beside them like a guardian carved from night itself. James's face was streaked with ash and sweat, his chest heaving. Lucas ran to them. "Is everyone okay?" James nodded weakly. "She's safe. That's what matters." Lucas turned to Shadow. "Good boy." And then a shout pierced the woods. "Over there! Movement!" Officer McCaffrey, part of the emergency task force, gestured toward the trees. Lucas turned just in time to see a figure darting into the shadows. Tall, wearing a dark jacket, fast. He didn't wait. "Go! He's trying to vanish again." The chase tore through the snowy woods, branches lashing their faces, flashlights dancing like ghosts across the trees. Lucas moved like a wolf, silent, sure, furious. Shadow ran beside him, his muscles remembering. Footprints in the snow told the story. The man made a mistake near a narrow ridge. He slipped. Lucas tackled him hard, wrestling the lighter from his pocket, the same one with VR etched deep. The man growled, but he was no longer fire. He was just ash. "Victor reigns," Lucas said through clenched teeth. "You're done running." Back at the site, Ellie was wrapped in a thermal blanket, cradled by paramedics. Maya had arrived, too, breathless, her dark eyes filled with fear. She knelt beside James, who sat on the bumper of an ambulance, silent, his hands shaking not from cold, but from something unnameable. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, her forehead resting on his shoulder. James let the weight fall off his chest, eyes closing, face buried against her hair. "I thought I lost everything again," he whispered. "You didn't," she said. "Not this time." Shadow sat a few feet away, alert, snowflakes settling on his coat. His head tilted slightly, not toward the forest, but toward James. As if watching not for threats, but for peace. And for the first time in years, James felt forgiven. 6 months had passed since the fire, and the night that passed tried once again to consume everything James Holloway had left. But the ashes had cooled. What remained was not ruin, but foundation. Spring came late in Silver Bend. Snow still clung to the northern slopes, and the pines still whispered ancient secrets through the wind. But sunlight had begun to filter through the clouds with more warmth than before. On a gently sloped hill near the eastern edge of town, the newly renovated structure of Shadowlight Center stood. Once an abandoned ranger lodge, it had been restored through donations, volunteer hours, and the quiet determination of those who believed in second chances. The sign out front read, in weathered wood, "Shadowlight, a place for healing, for humans and dogs alike." Inside, James stood at the front of a cozy, sunlit room. The walls were lined with framed photos, canine heroes, veterans, therapy sessions in progress, and near the corner, a mural of a German shepherd looking up at a child's drawing of the sun. James wore a slate blue shirt tucked into khaki pants, his graying beard neatly trimmed, eyes brighter than they had been in years. Beside him, Shadow sat with quiet pride, wearing a new collar, navy leather, polished silver buckle, and a small engraved plate that read, "Not left behind." A gift from Ellie. James cleared his throat and addressed the small circle of attendees. 6 veterans, 4 men and 2 women, each in different stages of recovery. One had a service dog already, a black lab with a limp named Radar. Another, a red-haired woman named Gwen with anxious hands, had never been near a dog since returning home. Shadow had already made it halfway into her heart by sitting near her and resting his head on her foot the week prior. "This program isn't just about dogs," James began, voice calm. "It's about what they remember that we forget. Presence, loyalty, silence when needed, action when it counts." He paused. "I'm not standing here because I healed. I'm standing because I am healing, and because a dog once reminded me that even when you've seen too much darkness, you can still guard the light." After the session, James stepped outside, where Lucas leaned against the porch railing, sipping from a thermos. His uniform had changed slightly since their early days. He now wore the captain's insignia on his shoulder. It still felt strange, he admitted once, but he carried the weight well. Lucas was tall, his posture straighter now, and the sorrow that had once defined the curve of his brow had been replaced with something steadier. He watched as James joined him, hands in pockets. "They really listen to you," Lucas said. "They don't need to listen to me," James replied. "They just need to listen to the dogs." They both looked to where Shadow trotted out into the grass, Radar bounding awkwardly behind him. A few of the others had come outside too, smiling, laughing, throwing tennis balls into the morning light. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Lucas asked. James shook his head. "Not in a million years." Behind them, Maya approached. She wore a soft gray coat over jeans, her black hair catching the sun. She smiled at both men before handing James a folder. "Final approvals just came through," she said. "We're good to expand the trauma therapy garden, raised beds, quiet zones, dog paths." She looked toward the meadow. "We'll need more benches, too. That one over there already has chew marks." James chuckled. Shadow's way of signing his work. Maya had moved into a cabin nearby weeks ago. Close, but not too close. They weren't rushing. But she came by each morning with coffee, and sometimes James made her his famous apple bread. In time, maybe the 2 lives once broken by tragedy could grow side by side. That afternoon, Ellie visited. She was wearing a yellow hoodie with tiny cartoon paw prints, her freckles glowing under the sun. She carried a small blue notebook and a collar tag keychain she had made in school. When she found James under the shade of the porch, she ran to him with a grin. "Shadow!" she called. The dog came at once, tail wagging like it had never known sadness. Ellie knelt beside him and slipped the keychain into his collar ring. It read, "Hero of the Hill." "I figured, now that you're famous, you need a title," she said proudly. James bent down. "Thank you, Ellie. He'll wear it like a medal." She leaned in and whispered, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm writing a book about him." "You'll need a good title," James said. "I already have one." She grinned. "The Dog Who Found the Fire and Turned It into Light." That night, James sat in his study at home. The window was open, letting in the smell of pine and distant rain. On his desk sat his old journal, this time with a new chapter. He wrote slowly, deliberately. "They say grief doesn't leave. They're right. But what they don't say is that it can change shape, soften, grow roots. Shadow didn't come back into my life to remind me what I lost. He came to remind me of what I still had the strength to build." He closed the book gently, laying a hand atop the cover. Sometimes God's miracles don't come with lightning or choirs of angels. Sometimes they come on 4 legs, with quiet eyes and a heartbeat that refuses to give up. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a messenger, a reminder that even after fire, after loss, after years of silence, love can still find its way back. James thought he was too broken to be forgiven. But grace doesn't ask if you're worthy. It shows up, sometimes in the form of a second chance, or a furry companion who never stopped believing in you. So, if you've ever felt left behind, forgotten, or lost in your own darkness, Remember, healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a dog's paw on your knee. Sometimes it's someone choosing to stay. Before you go, leave a comment below and share how animals have touched your life. Type Amen if you believe that no soul, human or animal, should ever be left behind. Subscribe to join a growing family that believes in hope, in redemption, and in the unseen hands of God that guide us home. May God bless you, and may He send a shadow to everyone who needs one.